Hello everyone. This is the quick video I promised, finishing up the slide deck for treatments of psychological disorders. I just wanted to go through the last three slides really quickly. And we had mentioned this slide. We talked about it a little bit here. So I wanted to finish this up. Cognitive psychology and cognitive therapies basically look at the thought process and how we think. And they identify the way that people think. And the belief and the assumption is that the way that you think is more important than what actually happens to you. So how you interpret and process information is more important than the information itself. And one of the things that they looked at was something that they called cognitive distortions. And these distortions are ways of misinterpreting information that can lead to things like anxiety and depression, paranoia, etc. And so these are some of the more cognitive distortions: personalizing, arbitrary inference, generalizing, magnifying, and minimizing. There are about 20 altogether, but these are four of the most common ones. So personalizing. I mentioned this one in class yesterday, so I'm not going to go over this one again too much, but when you personalize something, you basically say that whatever's happening is directed towards you and it has a negative impact only on you. Okay, that's personalizing. And the example we used yesterday was, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, they didn't respect me. And then you react, not to the fact that they cut you off, but you react to that belief that they disrespected you somehow. Okay, that's one example. There are tons of examples, right? Your boss changes a policy at work, and you think that the only reason they changed the policy is to screw you over. Okay, arbitrary inference. Arbitrary inference is when you believe that certain things that happen. Sorry if it jumped a little bit. I had to pause it for a second. But arbitrary inference is when you, in essence, jump to conclusions or come to beliefs where there really is no sufficient information to support that belief set. Similar to personalizing. So let's say somebody walks in front of you at a party. You might sit there and say, oh, that person did that to threaten me. That was an aggressive gesture. They cut me off in order to threaten me. And people around you will say, well, what are you talking about? That person never met you before. Oh, no, I know what they were doing, though. There's something they didn't like about me, and that was a threat. Okay, so that would be an example of arbitrary inference. Generalizing, similar to generalization when it comes to stimulus generalization, but generalizing is when you apply beliefs about one thing to a number of different things. So you're talking about generalizing an individual. Somebody might sit there and you might get into an argument and somebody hangs up the phone on you. First time it happened. So the person who generalized, like, oh, so this is what's going to happen every single time. Every single time we have a fight, you're going to hang up the phone on me, and this is going to be it for the rest of our lives. We'll have a fight, you'll hang up the phone on me. I can't do that. I'm done. Every time you hang up the phone on me. When the person hung up the phone once. Okay. Magnifying and minimizing, they're two different sides of the same coin. Magnifying is when you make a big deal out of something that's not a big deal, and minimizing is when you underemphasize something that might be important. I've seen people do this sometimes with grades. I've seen some very good students do this. They get a very good grade, and then they will minimize that grade. Oh, well, I just got lucky on the test, or I don't even know. The teacher was just being nice to me. They graded me high. Versus magnifying, where maybe they're pulling hundreds all semester. And all semester they're pulling hundreds, and then they get one grade of a 70, and oh, this is it. I'm ruined. My whole GPA is ruined. I'm never going to get into a 4-year school. I'm never going to get to graduate school. That's it. I'm finished. I'm done. There's no way. I actually had a student once in the case of magnifying. I had a student once, they failed everything. I used to structure the classes different. So I used to have 3 exams and 3 quizzes, and then I would drop a quiz and everything else. And I remember this student On 2 of the 3 quizzes, got a grade. I think one was a 10, one was a 20 out of 100. On the exams, all 3 exams, they never got above a 30 something. And on one quiz, where it was a very easy quiz, and I provided some of the answers because there were some confusing questions. They got a 90, and that one quiz was worth 7% of their grade. And when they failed the course, they confronted me after saying, "What are you talking about? I got a 90 on one of the quizzes. I was doing well in the class." And then, you kind of lay out all the other quiz scores for them, and they're focusing on the 90. That 90. So shouldn't that count for something? And I said, yes, it counts for 7% of your GPA, which is, it gives you 7 points out of 100, give or take. 9 points out of 100. And it was just a very classic case of magnifying, looking at or overemphasizing one thing in a big picture where there's a lot more information there. Okay? All right, now let's talk about humanistic therapy. Humanistic therapy is a style of therapy that has a few techniques in it. What happens with humanistic therapy is that it's a real shift in therapy away from the original styles of therapy, where the original styles, analytic psychology, behavioral psychology, even cognitive psychology, looks at identifying a particular problem and focusing and fixing that particular problem. Humanistic psychology takes a different stance. The approach in humanistic psychology says that we're treating an individual, we're treating a client, not a patient, and this is one of the big changes, right? We're treating a client, somebody who's paying us for a service. And we're going to focus on that whole client, not just a symptom, not just a disease. We'll focus on the whole client. And the goal is to help that client in any way possible and as much as possible, and help that client reach his or her full potential. Okay? That really is the crux of humanistic therapy. That's really what we do with it. All right? And another big shift in humanistic therapy is to focus on the present and the future. Analytic psychology spends a lot of time focusing on the past, what happened in your childhood. Behavior-based psychology focuses on the present. Let's change this behavior now. Token economy, I'm going to reinforce the behavior that I want to see. I'm going to reduce the behaviors that I don't, right? So that focuses very much on the present. Cognitive psychology focuses on the present. How are you interpreting this information? Let's see if we can change that. Humanistic therapy focuses on the present and the future. Those are the two most important things. And the goal of humanistic therapy is to help the whole person, not just focus on a disease and get that disease or get those symptoms reduced. Okay? Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow were the two big humanistic psychology people. You might have heard of Maslow with his hierarchy of needs, and that's where the concept of the full potential comes in. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy, if you've seen it before, it's not in the slide deck and it's not something you need to know, but just to give you some context, that's that pyramid that starts on the bottom where it's basic needs like food, water, and then as you move up the pyramid, it's going to be safety, and then it's going to be love and belonging, and then you move all the way up the pyramid, and when you get to the top of the pyramid, it's going to be self-actualization, meaning becoming the best person that you can be. Okay, so the goal with humanistic therapy is, again, not to treat a symptom and not to treat a disease. Figure out where the person is within that pyramid and help them move them up in that pyramid. So you're changing their whole life, not just one thing if you can. Now, some of the strategies or techniques in humanistic therapy are going to be empathy, meaning really connecting with the person and really, sort of sharing in that feeling state, right? It doesn't mean feeling bad for, it means sharing that emotional experience with the person. And this is very different. If you remember, we talked about the tabula rasa or the blank slate. With that type of therapy, really what we're talking about doing is just not really giving anything back to the client, right? Now, I'm not displaying anything. My goal here is to not put my emotions in the room. But when it comes to humanistic therapy, it's the opposite. I need to bring my emotions in the room. It's okay to cry. If a patient's crying, it's okay for you to cry. Obviously, you're not going to start blubbering and become hysterical and fall on the floor screaming, "Oh my God, it's so horrible." But it's okay for you to cry or tear up. Unconditional positive regard is also important in humanistic therapy. With unconditional positive regard, one of the things is how we interpret humans' behavior. Okay, look, we tend to pathologize things a lot in other forms of therapy. We tend to interpret things as being signs of disease or signs of illness. Instead of interpreting things as being signs of illness or disease, humanism tries to interpret things in essence what the best light possible is for the client. So instead, when a client doesn't show up for therapy, they cancel an appointment last minute. An analytic psychologist is going to call this resistance. A humanist is going to say, you know what? I must have really connected with this person and they must be feeling overwhelmed right now. And that's why they couldn't make it. Or maybe something else happened. But imagine all the feelings that they're feeling and they're still showing up every day. They didn't quit therapy. They're not bailing. They really are trying. Okay? And so they're doing the best they can. And I don't know necessarily how well I would do in those circumstances. So they really are putting their effort in here. And let's focus on that, and let's focus on, helping that person overcome this. One last technique that humanists use is something called paraphrasing and reflection, sort of two different sides of the same thing. So reflection is when you are physically, verbally, and non-verbally acknowledging the client's feelings. So when the person is talking, this might be you nodding your head in agreement. It could be making sounds, or the person could be saying, "Oh my God, I just lost my best friend," and you might say something like, "Oh, that must be awful, right? You must feel terrible about that. Must be a terrible feeling to carry around." Okay, so acknowledging their feelings verbally and non-verbally, and then paraphrasing is another one. Paraphrasing is restating what the client says using different words, and so the client might say, "Oh gosh, my whole life sucks," and you might say, "You feel like a lot of things are not going well right now." Is that what I'm hearing? Yes. Okay. And so, these things, when I demonstrate them and when you read them on the slide, sound kind of contrived. It's like the therapist is a robot that's just following a script, right? But the truth is, we do this a lot of the times anyway. We really do. And it's almost like most therapists train themselves out of doing this. They're so focused on analysis, or so focused on diagnostics or things like that they sort of almost forget that there's another person in the room. And these techniques are as much techniques that can be effective as they are to remind the therapist that they're working with a person. They're not working with a disease that they have to fix. Okay. The other part of this that's very important is with humanistic therapy, and this is where humanism is really kind of taken hold, and every therapist nowadays practices at least some sort of humanistic psychology. The reason why it's really taken hold is all of the research on therapeutic outcomes is the same. It all says the same thing. And basically they say that the most important predictor for treatment outcomes, meaning the thing that shows what's going to happen in treatment most frequently, is what they call the therapeutic alliance. Basically meaning that the most important part of a therapy process or a therapeutic dynamic, or the most likely thing to indicate health and improvement at the end, is the relationship that the therapist has with the client. And if you look at these things and the strategies, every single one of them is designed to increase that relationship. Every single one of these things is designed to make a connection with that person, which again is very opposite that blank slate, that tabula rasa that we talked about with analytic therapy. If you do this with somebody, you will connect. And the research basically says, listen, you can use cognitive psychology, analytic, behavior-based treatments, anything you want. If you don't connect, you're not going anywhere with the therapy. Okay? And so one of the things to understand with humanism is that you can still use behavior-based approaches. You can still be a behaviorist. and use humanistic techniques. You can still sit there and say, okay, we're going to start to engage in systematic desensitization. I'm going to slowly start to expose you to spiders, and then, we might eventually bring one in the room. And the client's like, I don't even know how I could handle spiders. And then you engage in your humanistic side and say, so I'm hearing that you're feeling very, very overwhelmed by the idea of me bringing a spider in the room. Okay? Instead of just sitting there saying, I'm going to bring in spiders. I'm feeling very overwhelmed. Gonna happen. Right? That wouldn't be a very humanistic way to respond to a client. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. Now, remember, for the exam, I'm going to post it on Blackboard. You have until Sunday night to do it, 11:59 p.m. Do it earlier if you can, because I want to make sure that if there are any technical problems, I can address them before the deadline. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I just wanted to remind you, if you're using the review sheets, remember, this exam covers everything we've covered so far, which means that you have the review sheet for exam 3, but that's only going to cover 2 things. You need to use the review sheet for exam 1 and 2 as well, because all of that material will be on there. As always, any issues, questions, problems, or concerns, give me a call. Email me, and hopefully you do well on the test. And I will see you guys on Monday. Have a good weekend.